Yeah, look, if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have been in the camp of, being very technical. And if
Yep.
it's not technical, therefore it's not good. But as, things have progressed, and I think a lot of the time, people get caught up with, the gear, they get caught up with what the
Yes.
actual
Yep.
speaker's doing. But the most fundamental thing that a speaker need to do is just to give us a feeling.
Devore Fidelity, the show partner of Not An Audiophile, the podcast. Devore Fidelity has become one of the most acclaimed high-end companies in the world, and having heard the loudspeakers many times, I know why. They're all still handcrafted in Brooklyn, New York. We love how this iconic brand captures the excitement and breadth of the sound. Nothing brings you closer to the music than Devore Fidelity. For a retailer near you, visit devorefidelity.com. And we are back. Not An Audiophile, the podcast, episode 51, season 3. Today we expose the truth. That's right. The truth is there is young people in the audio industry, relatively young, and they are appealing with their products to a younger audience. Some say this is not the case. We say it is. Atlas from Atlas Harmonic is an example. Let's have a listen to what he has to say. And today we're speaking to Atlas Gouverneur. How are you going, Atlas?
Doing very well, thanks.
Thank you for making the time to come on the show. There's a few reasons why we wanted to speak to you. One, you clearly have a pretty intense knowledge of loudspeaker design, which you've clearly been studying vigorously for some years, and other, in this case, mechanical engineering qualifications, which I guess sets you up well for understanding perhaps the more complex nature of some aspects of loudspeaker design. Is that right?
Yeah, it does, and that's that's quite a compliment. Thank you.
Let me compliment you more. You're not 60
All
years of age either, right? So I don't want to know how old you are, by the way, but I know you're probably, I'm going to say, in your 30s.
Yeah, 30, 36.
Okay, so a little bit of applause. It is nice to have someone younger on the show, and I have a political reason for bringing you on the show as well, which is that there's other audio media outlets talking about how, at the moment they're talking about how, who is the new generation that's going to keep the audio business in the audio business, and I mean you're obviously a prime example of that. So let's talk. We today are speaking about a number of, I guess, design ideas in loudspeakers that seem like a good idea from the outside, but never seem to have really hit the mainstream or have become de rigueur, so to speak, in design. Is there any particular, I've given you a list of subjects, is there any particular one that you would like to speak about more than another?
Um, there are quite a few. I was thinking recently about plasma tweeters, and it's something that you very, very rarely see, and I think for very good reasons. Incredibly dangerous.
Well, there is the danger aspect of any technology.
Yeah,
Actually,
and
as someone who knows zero about plasma tweeters, why don't you just tell us what the hell a plasma tweeter is? Since I guess you've had taken a bit of a look at it as part of your general R&D.
yeah, so plasma tweeters. If you think of a transducer, to create sound, you're moving a diaphragm, and a
Mm-hmm.
diaphragm has a voice coil on it and a magnet around the outside.
Sure.
And you put a variable signal through it, so AC signal, and that will repel and attract towards the magnet, and then therefore move the diaphragm
Mm-hmm.
back and forth, creating sound. Um, the pro of it is that it's very safe, very easy to use, very robust. Downside is that you have a mass, you've got a moving mass, and we know by force is equal to mass times acceleration.
Mm.
So if you have a mass, you're reducing your acceleration in some degree. And then when we think of a plasma tweeter, it's actually an arc. It's just putting an arc through the air And the
Okay.
air will vibrate without any mass. So you can have, you get that benefit. You have very low distortion. You also have fully omnidirectional sound as well because it's radiating in all directions of the arc.
An infinitely fast
The,
acceleration, I guess, effectively, because it's
yeah,
impossible to have otherwise. Well, limited by the density of the air or something, I guess.
yeah, exactly. And the only downside, and two major downsides, is that you need to be operating in the kilovolt range, which is extremely dangerous.
Don't touch the
Secondly,
tweeters, kiddies. And
you're
yes.
you're ionizing the gas, and that creates
Ah,
ozone in your house. And we all know ozone in the atmosphere is great, but not at sea level. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, so, but this is not my area of expertise, but isn't there, and probably not yours, but isn't there some kind of air conditioning, not air, and not in the traditional sense like a ducted or split system, but isn't there some kind of, oh no, that's ions, not ozone. Yeah, ozone. Yeah, ozone, of course, is yes. Sorry, I got confused. Yeah, ion generators. Perhaps ions are a good thing. Whatever the hell an
yeah,
ion is.
I thought it was going to be turned into a marketing campaign for a
No.
Dyson air purifier.
Yeah, well, look, like I said at the start, I have no knowledge of air conditioning, so I got confused for a second. Yeah, it's ion, you see, not ozone. But yeah, ozone, of course, is that weird smell that you get whenever an arc, which is something, as old TV technicians know back in the day, you'd have if you had a leaky high voltage thing, you'd get that ozone smell. Not good. So do plasma tweeters exist in production anywhere? Is anyone using them, like
There's
hiding them behind? How do you shield it?
Yeah, and they sort of that 1970s, 80s, they really sort of gained, I wouldn't say traction, but there was a lot more people using them, and that was I think because it was new, it was novel. You don't see them much anymore, but there are some brands that are manufacturing them for enthusiasts. None that are found out of five that I know, commercial available products because of the risk involved.
Yeah. So how do you kind of, in your research, how were people shielding little prying fingers from electrocuting themselves briefly?
And we really have to rely on mechanical guards.
Yeah, okay.
And probably not have any kids around.
Well, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so there's a classic example. Thank you for that. Where it's certainly technologically is an amazing idea. Is there any in your quest for the perfect loudspeaker? Did you investigate any other tweeter designs that perhaps are not known of widely?
Not in the same sort of range as the plasma tweeters.
No.
I have I think all the other sort of tweeters that I would use certainly are designed to be robust and safe to use.
Yep.
And look, when you look at there's not that much test reports to come out about plasma, but based on what I can see, a beryllium tweeter, a very well designed aluminium dome tweeter, will have distortion levels that are comparable. And I will say that back in the 1980s, the tweeters have come very far since then, with the advent of finite element analysis stuff that's been done.
Okay.
So I don't think the benefits is as great as it used to be.
No. In fact, when you think about the weight of a diaphragm versus the restriction perhaps that the air offers, I guess the difference between infinite acceleration and the acceleration achieved by a modern lightweight diaphragm is not dramatically different, is it? Or have you not studied that?
No, and it's not really. And when the more mass you add, it just requires more power. But if you modulate the acceleration, you effectively change the frequency.
Yes.
So it's not really important anymore because we can get very powerful amplifiers that fit inside a shoebox.
Well, indeed, yes. So, in fact, here's an angle that I'm interested, because you made an interesting comment that since the 90s, tweeters have improved, in your opinion, dramatically. So that nostalgic sort of, and the nostalgia for older speakers is probably more about the bass and the mid-range drivers, I think. But would you make a generalisation and say that, old tweeter designs are a bit clunky and heavy, and frankly, I mean, you're saying that the new ones are dramatically improved.
Yeah, and I think a big part as well is like the old tweeters had ferrofluids in them,
Yes.
which they didn't last. You had to repair them, and people just didn't know about how to repair them. So then,
No.
10 years goes by, and they go, "My speakers sound very dull."
Yes. Yes.
But the modern speakers don't have that.
No. Yeah, ferrofluid absolutely gone by the wayside, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has.
I guess to remind us, was it about... it's so long ago, I've kind of forgotten what it was for. I guess cooling was part of it. Was it a damping thing as well? Was it?
Yeah, it was damping and cooling. But I think it's just mainly because tweeters become so more advanced. But you know what? This is something I'm going to have to research more on, because now you asked a question and I'm thinking, yeah, why exactly did they have ferrofluid so much? And yeah, something to research.
Look, I'm old enough, unfortunately for myself, that I can remember when it came out. It was like it was a rave thing. Sometime, I don't know, maybe early to late 80s. I don't know. It was like, ferrofluid, cooled is the thing that I think they mostly talked about, was the advertising slogans. But I was always a little dubious of it. And then in more recent times, of course, pulling tweeters apart, trying to work out why they don't measure open circuit but refuse to produce any sound, and you soon realise why, and the whole gap is just clogged up with this brown, almost black goop.
Yeah.
I've got on my list I gave you, I've got a thing that's a little bit of a grey area. I've got a comment that says emotive connection versus technically correct. And I wrote that, even though that's not really anything to do with a technology. I mean, do you have, just before we move on to the next technology that hasn't really made it, do you have thoughts on that? Because I find myself a little bit torn. In other words, lack of coloration, perfect dispersion. Sometimes I feel that those loudspeakers that produce that technically correct outcome don't connect musically or emotively in relation to the music, like, say, some old, I don't know, big thumping great speaker that's probably coloured as hell, but I don't know, seems to make music. I know you've got a foot in each camp with your own designs. You have large models and you have small, and you have passive loudspeakers and you have active, so you're in probably a good position to put some flesh on this thought, I think.
Yeah, look, if you asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have been in the camp of, being very technical. And
Yep.
if it's not technical, therefore it's not good. But as, things have I've progressed and I've experienced audio more deeply, and I've even, seen more people listen to my design than other designs.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I think a lot of the time, people get caught up with, the gear, they get caught up with what the actual speaker's doing. But the most fundamental thing that a speaker needs to do is just to give us a feeling. We as humans have this amazing ability to have a emotional response to music.
Indeed.
And so I think the number one thing is that if you get an emotional response to a sound, to a certain style, that's the outcome achieved.
Yes.
I will say, though, I think there's a little bit of both. Like, it's kind of, not to, it's a cliche to say this, but it's about the balance. But I do think that there are some things that are fundamentally important to evoke a certain feeling that can't be negotiated. And they can be negotiated in some very certain instances. And my biggest one is power response and early reflection. So
Okay.
it was done, right, what was the study, 1980s in Canada. And they did a double blind test, and they found that a certain way that the speaker will radiate consistently, so it'll be a downward sloping power response, and that will get a higher likability score. However, if you run this test and you put it up against, say, like a Apple HomePod, it gets quite a good likability score. However, if you sit someone in front of it, and you put something like I'm not going to name a brand name, but if you put something that's, a $30,000 speaker that might get a likability score of 5, I can assure you the person who's listening to that $30,000 speaker, even without seeing it, it's going to have a better emotional response just because of the dynamics that are involved that aren't included in the study. However, if you were to compare apple to apples, and say a speaker that had the same drivers, everything it was the same, but one had a better power response, I can most certainly say that someone's going to have more of an emotional response to it.
March Audio. March Audio is a proud episode sponsor of the Not an Audiophile podcast. With a mission to provide superb technical performance and exceptional sound at modest prices, Alan March has designed a range of power amplifiers, a preamplifier, and a selection of stunning loudspeakers that you should check out now at marchaudio.com. Yes. So to break that down a little bit, you're saying firstly that the frequency response fitting with that desirable likability curve is only one aspect, that there are other aspects of, I guess, quality of, bass transient performance and general lack of distortion and, I guess, detail retrieval or something, and therefore adding a bit of zing and excitement could be similarly important in the likability stakes. Is that the gist of what you're saying when you mention the $30,000 speakers versus the $45
so
one?
One of the most common things I will see in not all speakers do this, and this is a shift that we're seeing. We're going, like I call it, I wouldn't say I've coined it, but we're going into a new paradigm of audio design, which I'm seeing is speakers that have very high likability scores.
Sure.
And this is the advent, of like Aaron's Corner and Audio Science Review, and so they're pushing this forward, and I think it's great for the industry because it's bringing about innovation.
So just put a bit of meat on that. So what are ASR and Aaron's Corner? I mean, I know ASR obviously is all about. Well, I thought they were all about measurements only, really, and that basically you like HiFi based on whether it measures well. I know that's a gross, slightly disingenuous generalisation, but I'll say it nonetheless because they as a how would I put it? And I'm not saying this about Aaron. I'm saying this about maybe the followers to some degree. They're very hardcore about measurements. But you're looking past that and talking more about this power response performance.
And I'm just sort of in a sense that it's changed. It's changed Hi-Fi. There's still the legacy brand that are doing things differently.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that we see that consistent in those measurements, and consistent in my own experience, like if I design something and I feel like it just doesn't have that emotional connection, most of the time it's because I got to suck out in my mids in the power response.
Okay.
And it sort of it sucks out, it becomes thin there, and you just don't lose that. You lose that body, you lose that velvety sound that you can get, and then the tweeter will kick in, and then that's very omnidirectional, and so you get a lot of excess power. Perceived power in the tweeter range, and so you're sitting there and you go, this sounds very brittle. And and this is the other thing as well, is if you haven't really listened to Hi-Fi that much, or that's all you've listened to, you will categorize that at clarity and go, that sounds really, really clear, because your ears are picking up on that 3 kilohertz range. You go, that's clear to me.
Yes.
But over time, or once you listen to speakers that have more power, you start to go, well, that sounds so full. Opposed to saying that sounds very bright.
So when you mentioned 3K, so are we treading on BBC dip territory here, or like some kind of engineered slight lack of emphasis on the presence region in a response? Is that sort of... I mean, I know you're kind of talking about a dip in the power curve in that area, so... which is emphasising the treble. So when you're somewhat off axis, or just let's say you're halfway, you're not in the general area of the speakers, you're some other part of the room, it makes the speaker sound thin and wispy in that room. Is that what you're saying?
And so like when you listen to a speaker, the general thought would be that you're listening to the first sound that reaches your ears, right? Like the on-axis sound. But really, when we listen to a speaker, we're taking that into account, and then all the reflection in the room. And so a lot of it, if you don't have a good power response, those reflection in the mid don't carry as much volume as say, the high treble.
Mm-hmm.
And so then your ears will naturally go to that high treble region or the 3 kilohertz region where we're most sensitive to and go, oh, there's more energy there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So where does this is getting a little bit away from what we were intending to discuss, but it doesn't matter in the slightest. So Aaron, who's like I guess he's a hi-fi reviewer in a way as a hobby. I don't know what he does for a real living. I got a feeling he's a pretty smart cookie, but doesn't he have his own? I've forgotten the name, but the fancy measurement system.
The spinorama.
Yeah, whatever the name of the actual system that generates those spinoramas. But yeah, anyhow, you know what I'm driving at. Is that where does he fit into your improving the world of hi-fi observation?
I definitely think it's accountability.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of. I think my personal take is, as a manufacturer, is sort of you have a duty to provide something that, if you're saying you're going to be truthful, then it should be, and then that should be one of the outcomes that you're pushing for.
Sure.
But I will say, not all speakers have to do this. Like, we've got these multi-cell horns that people love that would perform dreadfully on this response, but it doesn't matter. People will look at that and go, that's really cool, got the history to it. And that's not, I want background sound. I want, something that sounds reminiscent of that time.
Yes, yeah.
So did that too.
Yeah, I guess looking at it purely from a manufacturer's or a business point of view, I feel like there's a lot of different taste in audio, as there is we always in this show start talking about wine, but cars, motorcycles, push bikes, just, whether you walk through a park with earbuds in or not, there's all these personal preferences. People are doing different things for different reasons, but getting back to listening to music through an audio system, clearly when you go to a big audio show, there is lots of different presentation styles. There's kind of a place for everything, I guess. But you've done enough building, designing, listening. You've already said it, that you feel like it's just as important to have something that communicates and moves you as something that measures correctly. Have you managed to correlate? Can you tell us what the secret sauce is that you've found so far, do you think? What is it that moves us? You're saying it's got to have the right power response. It's got to fit with what Floyd conjured years ago. I guess you're referring to his his workings. Smart cookie, and did an enormous amount of tedious work getting. Can you imagine wielding these people into a room and trying to, in some kind of controlled way, and get sense from them? What a genius, really, that he talk about herding cats. Anyhow, so he's got all this literally R&D, I guess, that a lot of people sort of follow now, and I agree with the vast majority of it. It just makes good sense. And having spent a lifetime flogging hi-fi, you have to have a well-rounded, pleasant sound. You're not going to sell your average consumer who walks in the door something that's thin and screechy, or something that's super bassy and slow and doesn't have a lot of information, further up the spectrum. It's got to be basically a balanced performance, right? And then, as you say, the icing on the cake is improved levels of actual fidelity. But getting back to what I said, have you got feelings on? Because for the audience who's not familiar with your Atlas Harmonic products, you've got currently an active. Is it a 15-inch two-way? What's the size? Yeah. Okay, so you've got a bit of an old school. Like some people say it was a PA banger, but clearly it's not. It's got from my understanding, it's got some kind of DSP Hypex, Class D module in it that you've obviously fine-tuned it and made it sound delightful. On the other hand, you've got tiny little monitor speakers, so quite different loudspeakers. Is that just something that's the sort of the trail or the pathway you followed to get where you are? If you're listening to music for your own enjoyment, are you listening to your big Tufnell loudspeaker, or are you listening to your small, delicate little 5 1/4 two-way?
And it's interesting. It's like you're asking this because you set up both of them in a room, and they
Mhm.
sound so different.
Well, yes.
Even with a very similar like power response, it is night and day.
Mm.
And they both have different effects. Like I think one of the things we haven't really alluded to as well is that you've got the tonality, which is the power response of a speaker.
Yes.
But then you've got how it images in a room, and how when you sit in the listening position, you get this big swirling sound in front of you, that almost wraps around the back of your head, and then you get this big wall of sound. But like the Tufnell is more like a wall of sound, where it's a very it feels like it's a big slug of sound coming towards you, and you feel the dynamics, you feel the energy hitting you. You can't do that with a small speaker.
No.
However, a small speaker, when you listen to the Soundstage, it gets this very swirling effect. It's almost like hypnotic. And that's the smaller baffle. It radiates around the speaker rather than it pushing it directly in front of it. So, and I think as well, like you couldn't put the Tufnell in a small room. You need a lot of separation between you and the Tufnell, and the Tufnell between each other as well. So there is that limitation.
Is that a function of the bigger bass unit and the horn loading on the mid-tweeter, I guess? Is that the way it radiates, it doesn't come together until the wavefront's further from the speaker? Is that part of that? Or
it's that as well. But it's also just so much energy that you're putting into the room.
Yeah. Okay.
It just, like, even with the DSP stuff, it just feels like it's very overpowered.
Okay. Yeah, I comment on this based purely on aesthetics. I've not heard the speakers in the flesh. I'd like to do that sometime. Maybe when I'm in Sydney in a few weeks, we can talk about that. It'd be interesting to make the comparison you're referring to. But getting back to the Aaron's Corner power response, so you feel like by making that comment, you're kind of implying that the power response thing was not so weighing on people's minds so heavily in the 70s and 80s. Is that the way you feel about it, based on listening to some speakers from that era, or what's your, how do you arrive?
Most certainly, like a lot of the speakers you look at, like you'd look, like a good example would be a speaker with a 10-inch driver and a 1.4-inch dome tweeter, which wasn't uncommon. You're looking at a driver that would start to beam well, like it's not omnidirectional at the crossover frequency. So the range is between, say, 900 hertz to 2.5 kilohertz. It's a big suck out in the amount of power. On axis, it looks fantastic on the microphone. But then when you start to measure it around it, you got hardly any energy in that mid-range region. And so it just sounds very, very shouty, and it sort of almost demands you to put on very, very warm equipment just to try and tone it down.
Yeah, well, I guess I certainly concur. Well, 10-inch two-way is a very hard thing to pull off. There's no doubt about it. I've tried and failed. I mean, the bottom line is you need this tweeter to be this magical thing that can both meet, you can cross it over at a K or 1500 and it still has output at 20K, which clearly it probably won't. So yeah, it's hard to get away from a three-way, although you've managed to do it, of course, in your own, using, I don't know, is it because of the horn that it goes so low that you can get away with your Tufnell not having an off-axis dip?
Yeah, so that's the kind of, if you want to cross down low, you need to use a compression driver that got extremely high efficiency, over 100 dB per 1 watt. And then you're using a horn that actually shapes the sound so that it will match the dispersion of the 15-inch at the crossover frequency.
Yes.
But it will also allow it to sort of pull the sound out. It's a very specific sort of style of horn. But that's the general gist of it.
Yeah. So you can pull off a large driver two-way, but you've got to go about it the right way. Do you? This is once again got nothing to do with what we were going to talk about. Do you have a speaker from the 70s or 80s that you actually quite like? Is there something that you've gone, wow, that's actually a bit of a gem, or not so much?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think, yes, for sure. I think some of the old JBL stuff, for sure.
Okay.
I really like the sound of that. I've heard a couple, like I did like the Oltec Lantern stuff.
Yeah.
I do find it to be a little bit too thin in the bass,
Mm-hmm.
but I think for what it is, it it is impressive. It has a certain characteristic about it. It's got that air, but for my own taste, I would certainly want more bass out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess that's where there were limitations back in the day of, materials, motor, power, I don't know, the ability to both, get a low resonant frequency and, and some decent sensitivity, I guess, without having a cone that weighed a kilo or something. I don't,
Exactly right.
I don't know, not a lot, not a drive unit designer. Okay, well, we're going to take a 2-second break, Atlas, and we'll be back with Atlas just after this quick message. StereoNet.com. Forums, classifieds, news and reviews, opinion pieces. Mark Rushton has built one hell of a website, StereoNet.com. Take a look today. We're back with Atlas Gouverneur from Atlas Harmonic, and also the speaker project. Is that you build kit speakers, I believe?
Yeah, kits and speaker building workshops.
Yeah, okay, cool. So you get a group of people in and kind of give them some, I guess, fairly rudimentary but guided insight on how a speaker works and and then they build their own or something. Is that what happens?
Yeah, so it's a 4-part series, 4 evenings, and then we go through the basics of speaker design, how it's all done, what it means, and then they build their own speaker. So there's a couple of kits that they can build from. Some are pretty advanced, like the Truedaar, that had the time correction filter in it.
Yeah.
And then they go along, and then by the end they've built something that they've made themselves.
Cool. No one does that, so good on you. And that's in Sydney, one presumes.
Yeah, Sydney.
Yep. Hey, this episode was to kind of be about design ideas in loudspeakers that seem like they're a great idea, and they don't seem to have, even though they've been around for some, maybe even decades, have not kind of hit the mainstream in production loudspeakers. The obvious one, to use that horrid expression, the elephant in the room or whatever, is clearly active loudspeakers. You have a foot in both camps. What do you think active's not perhaps more, popular in hi-fi? Clearly in pro audio it is almost, I would say there's almost no passive speakers left in pro gear. Obviously in PA there might be, but not certainly in studio monitoring or maybe there is. I really don't know. I couldn't tell you the last time I walked into a recording studio. I guess I'm sitting in one right now, in a modern recording studio. I've got a Rode microphone and a Tascam recorder. Both of them didn't cost very much money, and they both produce amazing results. Never been a better time to have a home studio. But active speakers, and don't tell me it's because people like to buy their own amplifiers, because we know that. I actually think that's the main reason. But there must be other reasons, right? I mean, like they don't want to, because they can't play with the sound of the system so much. Although, can they? Do your actives allow a bit of tweaking?
I think it's kind of, like when you buy a car, you want to buy the rims, you want to get the tires, you want to get the spoiler. You don't want it all in one package. You want to customize.
Yeah, yes.
And it's definitely answering your the way you said it before in a different way. But I do think as well is previously, like 10, 20 years ago, inbuilt amplifiers, plate amplifiers weren't that good. Class D technology hadn't really been resolved properly yet. They were still quite grainy, like the old ice power amps that were very common.
Yes.
Solid state external amps, it just sounded way better. And I think we're still seeing the sort of the end of that, where people have that in their mind, and so they think of it as like, if I'm going to go to plate amp, I know I'm going to get that really bright sound, and it's still stuck in their mind about that.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But they've come so far. But that being said as well, like I've got passive speakers, and I absolutely love switching between different amps. Like it's a lot of fun. You get different sound. Some have a high damping factor, some have slightly more distortion.
Whoa, hang on a minute. But according to ASR, all amplifiers sound exactly the same, Atlas.
And I did read that about the damping factor, and I really do wonder if it's really that true, because you go to a speaker that has a really high damping factor, an amplifier, and you go to one that doesn't, and it really does sound like there's a big difference.
Yeah. There's a huge difference between amplifiers. I mean, anyone, I think, and I say very few things categorically. I make few categoric statements about hi-fi because everyone's welcome to their opinion. But anyone who says all amplifiers sound the same clearly needs to buy better loudspeakers or ears. Would you agree or disagree?
I do not understand how someone can make that statement. Yeah, and they sound so different.
Yes.
And even though the loudspeaker, contributes, like when you look at distortion profiles of a loudspeaker versus an amp, it's night and day. It's a loudspeaker that has all the distortion.
Yeah.
But even when you plug a different amp in, it has a massive effect.
Yeah, I review the occasional product, and I'm constantly reminded that just how different two good amplifiers can sound. They both have their own set of positive attributes, but they still produce quite different sounding music. And then these are not things that tone controls would change either. This is not about frequency balance or response. It's different ways they have. So you think Class D's gotten basically good enough now that an active module on the back of a box is a pretty decent solution?
Oh, fantastic solution! Like the quality you're getting out of these, especially like from Hypex, it's amazing. Like it's competing with very expensive amplifiers in terms of distortion levels.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and of course the damping factor is very good on those amps. I understand. Yeah, I love the fact that you can just have an idea, or let's try this, and rather than mucking around trying to go through the drawers and find some resistors, caps and inductors that are kind of the right value, you just dial up what you want. It's great for experimentation. Have you've sort of used it as a tool like that a little bit in your development of the active speaker, the Tufnell?
And actually, for all my designs, even if it's going to be a passive, I do it. That's the workflow. So I have actually a Hypex amp built into a little MDF box, then I'll take that around and listen to the speakers with different filters, and I would have a look and go, how did that sound? Because a lot of the time as well, I'm trying to push a crossover. My style is to push a crossover down as low as I can for the tweeter until I start to see okay, that's distortion. We can't do it there. That's pushing it too hard.
Yeah.
And I just go back to the power response as well, and it's a style that I really like. So you can just listen to it and go, how does it sound? And if it sounds good, then you can go, okay, let's lock that in, and then let's now build a passive version. Do
you find you try different acoustic slopes, orders of slope, and just see how that sounds? Does that not work in DSP, where the slopes don't sound different for the same reasons they do with a passive filter? And no, it's exactly. They both have the same amount of phase shift. And I think one of the biggest differences in the plate amplifiers or the one with DSP in it is that you can actually delay each speaker driver. Whereas if you were to just have two speakers in the same baffle, you have to consider the slight delay between the tweeter and the woofer. Yeah. And that affects your filtering as well, because you have to build that into a passive circuit unless you do a time delay circuit in there. Then so you have to account for that. Speaking of time delay circuits, so I've seen in your paraphernalia that you mention a passive time delay circuit. I mean, what's that? A really infinitely long piece of wire, so it takes a while for it to get there, or is it? Why are you laughing? And electrons move at the speed of light, so I imagine it would have to go. It'd be really, really long to go to the moon and back. Lyrics for a song there. So tell. I guess it's part of your secret sauce, but can you Can you tell us a little bit about how that might work?
Yeah, so essentially what a time delay circuit is doing in a passive crossover is you want to delay the signal without inducing any slope. So um, at a, so you're essentially using inductors and capacitors in a certain orientation that will delay the signal at the crossover region by how many milliseconds that you need.
So it's a phase shift, but at even across frequency, I guess.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
So like, for the common way to do it, this is getting a bit technical, but a common way to get speaker drivers to align at the crossover frequency is to use varying filter slopes. So you use a second order, which gives you 180 degrees, and then you use a third order, which gives you an additional 90 degrees of phase shift. And when we say 90 degrees of phase shift, that correlates to a time offset. So that additional 90 degrees, or you might be only adding another 50, will give you the right amount of delay between the woofer and tweeter so that they're in time. But the issue is that it's only applicable at that crossover frequency. And as you start to get on each side of the crossover, it doesn't align anymore. But with an all pass, it's aligned perfectly over that crossover region.
Yeah, I'm kind of a bit rusty at the moment. Whenever I'm not in the middle of a design project, I kind of forget everything I ever knew and have to relearn it. But which is a function of age, not phase shift. The point is that yes, different crossover slopes cause different phase shifts, but only once they've started rolling off. Is that like when they're in their pass band, there is no phase shift, is there? So if you've put a third order filter on a tweeter, for the pass band of the tweeter above that turnover frequency, obviously there is no delay, no phase shift. Is that what you're trying to say? But once it starts rolling off, there's a time delay. Is that, or is it the other way around?
And yeah, so it means that, like, say for instance, you got like a 2 kilohertz crossover, and where the woofer and the tweeter crossover at 2 kilohertz, with the conventional filter right at 2 kilohertz, they're both in phase. But then as you start to move away, so you're now at 2.5 or 1.5 kilohertz. They're no longer in phase with each other. So the summation is not so great.
No.
Whereas if you do a time delay, you can get the summation to be following each other away from the crossover frequency. And the reason why it's so important, and why I like the sound of it so much, it allows me to use true Linkwitz-Riley filters, second order. Which I can get a more gentle slope on the tweeter, which it balances, and this goes back to power response as well, balances out the power response because you're helping the tweeter, the woofer, in your region away from the crossover. Sorry, this is very technical, and I hope the listeners are following here.
Many will, and others have switched off, which we will ask them kindly to hang on because we'll move to something simpler. But I mean, an analog time delay circuit was always going to be complex. So you somehow grouped together in some kind of circuit a bunch of, well, not a bunch, a quantity, one or two or whatever, chokes, two caps, whatever, I don't know. It's not something I've ever read about, and someone who's studied the cookbook to death, it doesn't come up. So you thought this up, or you discovered it in some paper somewhere from AES or something, or what's the heritage of that, or was it just mathematics? And you thought, what if I did this?
I wish I could say I was that intelligent, but
you can say it if you want.
No, it was so. My journey was just going onto forums and reading, and I remember just reading someone talking about this time delay circuit.
Sure.
And I just thought that was so fascinating. I remember looking into it and going, "Oh, that's really advanced. I don't have the time for this." And it was when I first starting out. And then as I started building speakers, and this was well into my speaker project days. I had the Truett, and I really wanted to step it up. I wanted to make it something special. And I said, you know what, now's the time to learn how to build a time delay circuit.
Sure.
And it was actually during COVID, and I couldn't go anywhere.
Well, no.
First time for it. And so I just spent weeks just tinkering away to get this filter to work. And then when it did, it was absolutely amazing, because it is a very different sound in terms of, it sounds like an active system with that time delay, but then you get to use the different amplifiers. So kind of, in my take, the best of both worlds.
My brain's wandering, and I've suddenly, as I'm listening to you talking about it, I've suddenly thought of series crossovers. I don't know why. Do you know it? Because that's another kooky thing, and that's something that series crossovers are strange beasts. Have you ever read, studied, or experimented with those?
I haven't experimented with them, and I do take my hat off to people who develop them.
You can make one work. That's right.
Yeah, because both drivers have, affect each other, and they, the benefit is you use very little parts, and it's not in the direct signal chain.
No, I just find them completely intriguing because, but you said you were talking about crossovers, and you said COVID, and you had a lot of time on your hands, and I immediately thought series crossovers because I think you need a lot of time on your hand to get one to work properly. But when they do, they're such a neat thing, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Anyhow, we know why people don't use series crossovers, and I think it's because there's no real software, and parallels are just, which is a traditional what everyone builds. When we talk crossovers, folks who are not wondering what the hell we're talking about, a series crossover, the signal kind of almost passes through both drivers in series, like batteries in a torch, doesn't it? I mean, it's and so the character of the impedance characteristics, etc., or reactive characteristics of the voice coil in one driver affects the response of the other one, or something like that. Anyhow, out of my league. Hey, there's a list of things there to wrap up today, Atlas, that are things that I've listed that I feel they're both older ideas in a way, but ideas that have disappeared or never quite made it. One is, first order filters used to be what everyone used, and everyone's gone away from them. Maybe you can throw some light on why that is. And then the other one is, what is the other one? I guess you must have tried. What do you feel about MDF versus plywood?
Yeah, I think they both have their benefits. I think a lot of people used to sort of go, oh no, MDF isn't good. It's a cheap material, but the benefit that it has is that it's got great damping. Mm-hmm. It's very dense. It's dense for cellulose material, and it had the inherent damping properties in it. So when you think of a speaker driver that doesn't have any damping, it rings, and then if you have good damping, it sounds like a dead box. But I think the way I like to make my speaker boxes is to use both plywood, a composite plywood on the outside, mm-hmm. and then MDF damping bracing inside, which adds the mass and it has the damping properties in it. So
do you have speaking of mass, do you have a thought on if you could have an infinitely light speaker enclosure? Would that be a good thing or a bad thing?
And there's two fields of thought there. An infinitely light one will bounce back, so it wouldn't per se rob any energy from the speaker driver itself, and it would act like a pure spring. Mm-hmm. The only issue is that the cabinet would bounce around like a spring, and it would become a radiator,
which then immediately changes the mass. What if you screwed it down to a solid object? But then effectively that becomes the mass of the enclosure, doesn't it? So then it's infinitely heavy. So
yes. There's two thought experiments. Is what would happen if you have an infinitely light with maximum stiffness, mm-hmm. or you had a speaker driver that was infinitely heavy with zero stiffness, like a bag of sand, kind of thing. And I would think the bag of sand would win.
Yeah,
Could you get the damping? You want that damp sound. You don't want the speaker enclosure to be a radiator itself.
And then what if you put a cat in it? Hello. Sorry, I suddenly thought of Schroeder's cat for some reason. Take the bass driver out. I don't know. Is the cat really in there? I don't know. Is it alive or dead? Anyhow, no. The thing is, it's
good.
Well, I love cats, by the way. Find the sound of your life by crafting a quality stereo system with the HiFi Shop. featuring all the brands you know and love: Rega turntables, Bowers and Wilkins loudspeakers, Exposure electronics, amplifiers and CD players from the UK, and of course Sonos Faber loudspeakers from Italy. The HiFi Shop helps you create your sound. Visit the team at hifishop.com.au. I said infinitely light, but then it kind of doesn't work, does it? Because it just float. It literally, for it to be light, it literally has to almost float. And then, well, actually, probably the closest thing to an infinitely light box is a super light plywood box that's suspended, hung by chains. People used to do that. I'm not sure. I can't honestly remember whether that worked well or not. Anyhow, I think we've gone sideways. The thing is, you quite like plywood as well, is the gist of it. Have you ever built just a plywood box?
I have.
And did it have a certain transparency in the mid-range? Because this is my belief, is that the ones I've built, I always feel like the mid-range is more open and has a certain clarity, a lack of clouding that I feel MDF brings on, but it could be just my poorly designed MDF boxes. But do you feel there's a bit of that there, or you haven't found that?
I haven't found that. Only reason why I haven't been able to make a deduction is I've always just strived to have very overly braced boxes, and the differences wouldn't matter. Like the amount of unsupported area because of the amount of bracing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I am referring to a BBC style lossy box that I manufacture. That I think it's got something special in the mid range, but it actually could be more to do with the design of the enclosure than the material that I used. Although you did mention to me at some point that plywood is dramatically stiffer than MDF. But then if you brace the hell out of it, what does it matter? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like the bracing had a much more profound impact than the actual material itself. For the same thickness, that is. But so if you didn't have an unsupported, like if you were to have a box with not braced, and you were to compare an apple to a pear, if you were to compare,
with or without a cat.
If you were to compare a plywood speaker box with an MDF speaker box, the plywood would definitely win, only because the plywood would deflect around about 3 times less than the MDF for the same thickness. And so will have less effect in that instance. But yeah, and look, this might be an experiment we have to do.
Yeah, well, I have done actually a lot of. Well, I'm in the joyous position of having my own sort of cabinet factory, so I can play with ideas. And a long time ago, during COVID, when I had more time, I did play with plywood versus MDF a lot, and played with bracing versus unbraced, and the lossy box idea and all of that. And I still ended up, I've developed 2 plywood boxes, and one's braced a lot, lots of bracing, but lots of damping material as well, like my idea of an equivalent of a bituminous pad everywhere. And I feel both boxes sounded better in the mid-range, and that's where the question comes from, is that plywood could be generally regarded as sounding better, although you're saying if you brace it correctly, no difference. And I respect that, because it makes complete sense. I mean, let's face it, if the panel can't vibrate because there's so much bracing, then, surely it doesn't matter what the material is. In fact, the material with internally damped, a bit like MDF, surely is a better material in that situation, maybe. But yeah, there was a certain charm to both of them that I felt, our MDF boxes, not so much. But, I mean, not to say the MDF were bad. They were braced enough. They were basically inert. I always feel there's this slight muddiness to an MDF box, which, it's probably imagined. It's like a lot of things in hi-fi, right? You think it should sound this particular way, so you kind of cast that aspersion on your ear.
And it definitely makes sense to me, like what your statement was about being muddy, because it's moving more. And if it's moving more, it's taking more energy away from the speaker driver. And 2, it's actually vibrating and creating, it's resonating the air on the outside of the speaker box, which you will hear out of phase with the original woofer. But one thing I will say about all of this is that the biggest thing that I've ever changed over MDF plywood discussion is actually lining the inside with lead or rubber.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is, especially in the low range of vocals.
Yeah.
I think that probably because we can hear changes in vocals very well. But yeah, once you line it, you really hear the clarity come through. You don't get that sort of, sometimes you would hear it and you can hear a little spike in resonance in the vocal.
Yeah.
And that goes away when you line it with damping material.
You mentioned lead, very out of fashion, but such a great material for that purpose. You can see or imagine or understand why they used it back in the day. Have you actually? Because weirdly, you can buy lead at Bunnings, right?
That's where I buy it from.
Yeah. So, yes. For American listeners, that's. I've forgotten the name of the American hardware store chain. Geez, whatever it's called. Anyhow, we know the point is Bunnings is an enormous general hardware store, which put every other.
It's a Home Depot equivalent.
Home Depot was. Yeah, thank you. They got everything in there, right? And sometimes I used to wander around in there for sort of material ideas, and I'm sure you've probably done the same, where you're like, oh, maybe there's something that's just common as hell off the shelf that I can use for this purpose, and then sometimes there it is. Particularly, of course, in speakers, it would be plumbing stuff for ports probably, but So you grabbed some lead from Bunnings and you ran the experiment, and you were pretty happy with the outcome, was what you're saying.
Yeah, because I've built so many Truett and Truett R cabinets, and I have so many floating around that I was able to do this. And I found that I actually couldn't hear a difference between the two outcomes. One was using, I think it's around about 1.2 mil thick lead, versus 4 millimeter thick rubber.
Okay, so much the same outcome between those two. Yeah, right.
And slightly heavier in the lead department, but still incredibly heavy. Like we're talking like a two-way speaker with a 5-inch woofer weighing in around about 20 kilos.
Oh, yeah, well, that's definitely going for the infinite heavy design idea. So
yes,
yeah, that's actually that's super solid. Yeah, okay, all right.
And you actually hear it. Like if you pick up the panel before you glue up the speaker, you can knock your hand on it, and you can hear like the sound of it without it. Quite, you can hear the knock. When you put the rubber or the lead on it, it has like you hear a little bit of it, but it's substantially softer in volume.
Yeah. I find it a very interesting subject because, of course, it's very much it's like building guitars but in reverse. Like it's in the sense that you're obviously part of the art of a guitar maker, I guess, is getting the body to produce a rich, pleasant, exciting sound. And of course, in loudspeaker design, it's kind of the opposite. You want it to produce, in theory, no sound, I guess, unless you can. And which is where I feel the BBC lossy box, where you're trying to work with the resonances more than get rid of them completely, which maybe is a decent compromise. Now, I'm going to... we've come this far. How about I just ask you one other question, and then and I'll let you go and get on with your day. I'm going to ask you about isobaric. Have you ever experimented in that, or you feel it just is a waste of time?
Look, I have never made an isobaric, and I think it's a fantastic solution to space. Reduce the cabinet volume, and then still get the lower tuning frequency. And I've heard your designs, and you can see how small it's not exactly small, that floor standard you have, but it definitely goes down way lower than you'd expect it for a size.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that because we don't talk about that loudspeaker much, but actually that's a twin, well, it's not a twin 10-inch, it's one 10-inch exposed to the outside world, but there's a second one hiding inside. And even I kind of are impressed by that because there's two things going on. It's a sealed isobaric, which I think is the only kind of isobaric that really works as far as a transient response. It is quite articulate, within reason. It goes quite deep within reason, but yeah, it's not a big box. But it's way bigger than an AI one, if you know what I mean, because the problem is the packaging of isobaric. If it has a problem, is how do you make those two drivers work together and enable being able to get, like, physically mount the second one in such a way that you don't waste a lot of space just making it happen. And that's one of the negatives. But it's not so much because I have been involved with isobarics that I mentioned. It's more like really no one kind of makes one anymore except me and three other people. There's really and I don't know who the other three people are. Even Totem in Canada, who used to make a very good one, I don't know that they make any anymore either. But I feel like there's one other manufacturer. But anyhow, that's why I asked, just in case you'd experimented with them, because they're great for getting bass extension out of a smaller box. But guess what? In the scheme of things, I don't know that bass extension, this is one thing I've learned along my path of loudspeaker design on and off for a very long time, is that I'm not sure bass extension's that important. You know what's important is a tuneful bass that goes reasonably low. Do you have a feeling on that? And we're getting away from our original subject, but do you have thoughts on that?
I feel like bass is, it's what grounds the music. It's what's getting, you moving. It's what carries the whole music itself. And I thought, experiment is to listen to a speaker that only had a cutoff of 200 hertz.
Oh, that's not good.
No, and then you think of a speaker that had a cutoff of 40 hertz.
Yeah.
And then you have a speaker that has a cutoff of 20 hertz, and you can sort of imagine what the differences are. I think here's the thing that I think it does change your listening experience. Sometimes if you go too low in a speaker, it becomes a little bit, especially in the room that you're sitting in, it becomes a little bit distracting. And so especially when it starts to go very low, you start to think about, I feel my couch rattling. I feel, it
energizes the room a bit much, unless the room is really optimized for it, I guess. Otherwise, everything rattles, I suppose, to some degree. Is that what you're kind of driving at? Like the floor starts vibrating if it's not a concrete floor.
Yeah. But if you have a room that's right for it, especially if it's got bass traps, it sounds amazing. It's just like, especially if the bass isn't 10 dB above everything else. But I would always try and go down lower. I think that's always been the objective for me, because it just does make it more enjoyable.
Yeah, I should clarify my statement more with that. Extension is the goal always, but also a correct alignment and getting that lack of distortion and a good transient performance, I feel, is equally important. And so a massive trade-off for bass extension could result in slightly less enjoyable bass because you've kind of ruined other aspects of the performance.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. No, for sure.
Yeah. I shouldn't just... I love bass extension. I think a full-range speaker that genuinely goes flat, like 3 dB down at 20 hertz and 3 dB down at 20K is really what all loudspeakers should be, but it's just about impossible to achieve, isn't it, really? It's certainly without it being big. On that,
just one thing I would like to throw in there is, because I don't know if you saw, I did the Tufnell and Zeus setup, and I specifically chose a ported design for the Zeus, which is a 21-inch.
The Zeus being the big bass bin box subwoofery thing. Yeah.
And I had, a design choice: ported, sealed, or a folded horn.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell us about that. Yeah. All right. Oh, sorry. What size is the bass unit? Huge. 21. 21. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, with a 22,000 watt peak.
Okay, so it should make a noise.
Yeah, so 2,200 watts, sorry. So quite a lot. And so, one of the things, because I don't know, you might still be going to nightclubs, but I certainly do. And one of the things I noticed, a big thing about nightclub systems, is a lot of them run horns, folded horns.
Yeah. And
Powerflex or something like that. And they're very efficient. They can have 6 to 12 dB gain over a ported design.
Yep.
But the issue is that they have a whole lot of delay, a lot of group delay. And you really feel it. Like you're listening to your music and you can really hear that, especially when it's excessive, that the bass it's hitting you before the top of the drum. And it's like, this sounds like a different instrument. It could be so far back.
Yes.
And so, and then you look at a sealed enclosure, which has the least amount of group delay, which is very, very tight. But then it has, a shallow roll off. But then you go ported, and it's, I think it is an absolute benefit. It's best of both worlds.
Mm. Yeah,
So
a well executed ported design is very hard to beat. I think it's but then there's a whole conversation there about the way those two boxes sound, and it's probably completely to do with the way it rolls off. A sealed box in theory is quicker sounding, but it can sound slightly less punchy, I guess.
Yeah, less meaty.
Yeah, than a ported box, which has got this. I guess it's got more of a knee to the lower end response, and it just whacks you in the guts a little harder or something.
And it's more efficient as well, so you get more out of it.
Yeah.
But I think another point that is worth mentioning is it's port noise. A lot of ported designs will have some, not all of them, but will have some degree of chuffing or port resonance.
Mm-hmm.
And then that will also give an illusion of there's something else in there that is a bit muddy. And a sealed box won't have that.
Well, that's the purity of the sealed boxes, or even a passive radiator where you just get rid of that port noise. That's certainly one distinct advantage of both of those two alignments, methodologies. How big a port did you end up with this 21-inch driver? It must have been, not that the driver's a function of the size of the port, but the box, how did it work out? Do you end up with actually a sensible port?
It's actually not too bad. I think it's around about 500 or 600 millimeters. It's a slot port, 600 millimeters long by around about 5 centimeters or 6 centimeters high.
Yeah. Okay.
But I've actually done it so that design, it served both. I built that for a listening event, and which I'll do more of. But I built 2 ports actually. I built one port for lower listening, which allows me to have a smaller cross-sectional area, which can allow me to go deeper. But when I want to use it for parties or really high output, I switch it over to another port that's built for loudness.
Switchable ports. Yeah, right. Are they solenoid actuated or something? No, it's obviously separately screwed in from the front, I presume.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Look. Hey. Look. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think it's a great introduction to who Atlas at Atlas Harmonic is. It's been great to sort of hear your insights. We've kind of gone off in an odd, completely different direction. I don't think it matters. It's been a fantastic chat.
My apologies.
Hey, both of our faults. It's been very, very interesting, and love to catch up with you in a few weeks when the Sydney audio show is on, which is at the start of May for those who are listening and live in Australia and want to get a taste of at least a reasonable selection of cross-section of different kind of audio equipment. And there's a lot of Australian manufacturers actually at that show, which is part of the reason why I'm going to talk to some of those people. But if we can catch up with you, that will be something we'd love to do again, then in person. And thanks for getting on the phone today, Atlas.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks. DeVore Fidelity, show partner at Not An Audiophile, the podcast. John DeVore is the founder and top banana at DeVore Fidelity, and he's currently on a world tour. One stop on his world tour, other than various dealer stores, etc., is Exponor. Exponor's on 10th, 12th of April, and the product will be there. Go and have a listen. They're stunning. Thanks for listening.